working. So it was a joy for me. I hadn't had a chance to meet Wendy Farley before. She was at our church on Sunday, leading an adult ed class and helping us begin this exploration of contemplative practices and how this interior work leads us into deeper lives of compassion for ourselves and the world. So it was a joy. Thank you again, Wendy. So without further ado, Wendy, please lead us into our first study and conversation.
You know, I don't know exactly what you want from me. And so I am showing up to, have a conversation. And I'm not, I can do what you like, but I'm not inclined to lecture to you or at you, but just to see what thoughts you yourselves have as you, maybe you look at my book, maybe you don't, that's up to you. This book is about using beauty as a way into deeper relationship with the beloved and deeper into relationship into the beautiful and suffering world. And for me, it is both a very nurturing way to live a spiritual life, because beauty is by its nature nurturing. It feeds our soul. But it also sharpens our sense of compassion and tragedy, because when you notice beauty, you notice when it's harmed. So when you fall in love with the world, its suffering is in a sense more acute. And so it's for me, a spiritual practice that really is constantly balancing or integrating or synthesizing in new ways, deepening relationship with the beloved, deeper sense of the belovedness of the world, and a greater tolerance to accept and respond to the terrible tragedies in our lives and in the world around us. And in that sense, it's not a contemplative practice that is concentrative. You sit on your pillow and meditate for 20 minutes, and then spend 20 minutes being frustrated because your mind is just throwing up all kinds of noise. And then you say, oh, I can't do this. I'm not good at this. That kind of prayer is very, very powerful. And many people find it, do it for decades. But many people do not find it at all helpful. And so I think part of what I wanted to do is indicate there are many, many ways that our heart and spirit opens to the beloved. And all of you will already have your own ideas about that and your own ways of thinking about that and doing that. So those are just a few orienting words, but what I would really myself enjoy is hearing your thoughts on practice, on spirituality, on tolerating a world full of suffering, tolerating not in the sense that you think it's okay, but finding it bearable, finding ways to bear the truth of the world. Questions you have? I'm going to get my tea, but I can hear you. So I know many of you are involved in the contemplative programs at the church or elsewhere, and maybe many of you are not. And the whole idea of contemplation is not of tremendous interest to you. So help me think about how this little pop-up community can be in dialogue with each other. What's on your minds and hearts?
Wendy, I can tell you just for a fact, factual info, that there are 4 of us, right, who are in our contemplative prayer, centering prayer
Uh-huh.
community and meet once a week.
Mm-hmm.
And I have, is that right? Are there 5? 1, 2,
Carolyn.
5. And have begun to discover that well, this I'm speaking now, the sitting part doesn't feel like anything's happening, but then you begin to see changes in your daily life. And there's a portion of your book that I just put a big green square around. Maybe I'll read it just to get us going. Okay.
Sure.
Moments of silence and solitude help to cultivate a space within us, and then moving down. But they do not make the divine beloved present. They can only make us more aware of the presence, which is there in the pots and pans, at the sick bed, and present while we nurse or cry or type or protest. There's more to that, but I love that.
Oh, good. Well, there is this, these different ways of talking about our spiritual life. And one is to think about periods of practice and periods of practice that might include silence, say silent prayers or and I am someone who really enjoys periods of practice. But I think of them, partly they do their own work, as Kay says. You don't really notice it. It's not like Jesus appears on clouds of glory and all of a sudden your life has changed. You just show up and you do your thing and then you go back and wash the dishes. But devoting yourself to any kind of spiritual practice that brings us closer to the divine beloved has this effect on us. But ultimately, it's really about living, finding ways to live. And I find spiritual practice really powerful. But I also am aware that people find many, many ways of falling in love with the world and with the beloved. And this language doesn't connect to them particularly. So I kind of want to honor that whole range.
That was one of the big appeals of your book. So many Presbyterians in particular don't feel like becoming monks.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and our tradition historically has been very dismissive of the interior life and of practice. And the modern world sort of conspires with whatever theologically was going on there at that historical moment and really invites us to think of our life as on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
What we eat, what we watch, the work we do, the entertainment we engage in. We're not really encouraged. Many cultures think of the integration of all the dimensions of ourselves as perfectly natural. And we live in a time when that's not, when the depths of ourselves are even mutilated by the kind of world we live in. And so this recovering this language of contemplation and practice and spirituality is a way of connecting to a part of ourselves that our larger social world is very interested in obscuring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Lorna.
I
shared with the Centering Prayer group a while back, maybe last year or something. I can almost pinpoint a change in me in terms of how I inhabit the world.
Mm.
And one example is my partner and I used to go to the theater a lot. And especially when you go to the Curran, you park in the parking lot and then walk up to the Curran, there are often a lot of folks begging on the street, sitting on the street. And I remember when we were first doing that, or I was first doing that, going to the Curran, I remember kind of rushing past.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit, like, should I be afraid of them? Or, the other. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and then for some reason, all of a sudden I saw them with different eyes.
Mm.
I saw them, I think it was the eyes of my heart,
Mm.
rather than should I be afraid or they're different or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. It was, I wonder what's brought you here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This situation. And
Yeah.
I don't know about the time I started spiritual direction or not. I remember when I was talking with different spiritual directors about whether it might be a good fit. One person asked me, "So what brings you here?" And out of my mouth somewhere, I said, "I think I'm in love with God." No, that sounds crazy, but
Ah, isn't it crazy that we gather here, mostly out of the Presbyterian tradition, and say, isn't it crazy that I would say I'm here because I'm in love with God? That something about our formation, our language, makes us feel a little embarrassed about that, or what's that about, or that's a weird way to talk.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I think you've described something I was trying, with or without success, to express when I have been thinking about these things myself, and that is beauty isn't something you see with your physical eyes, but with your heart. And so what you're describing is you looked at folks with your physical eyes, but also with your social formation. We have language for folks who are on the street or desperate or don't have means to feed themselves. We have language for that. We have categories.
we have assumptions.
And we have a lot of assumptions. And what you describe is somehow that got broken open.
Yeah.
And for me, it's a perfect example of what the whole point of contemplation is. You named the two wings of it, which are actually two names for the same thing. I'm in love with God. I'm in love with beings because I'm better able to perceive their beauty.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful, lovely little icon, sort of what the spiritual life seems to be about.
And yet I noticed it I read the introduction in the first chapter, and I'm not sure I saw the word God in there, but I only saw one little word of Jesus in there. And it's using divine love, beloved, all these other names.
Mm-hmm.
I know it must be deliberate on your part.
Mm-hmm.
And what reason?
Yeah, well, I did write a book about the incarnation, and Jesus is in there a lot. So there's that. But I often use different language because I think as soon as we use our familiar language, we lock on to a familiar story and an idea.
Mhm.
So if you say, of course, God doesn't have a gender. He is, beyond that. So immediately even when you're denying that God is like a person with a kind of physical anatomy, your mind is immediately rehearsing what you know about God, that God is a he, that God is male. And depending on the kind of God you grew up with, he might be a scary judge. He might be, who knows what he is. But as soon as you use that familiar language, you're right there with all of your good and bad assumptions. And when you use, I mean, this is one of the things, it's familiar to us now, but it's one of the interesting things about the Bible. And with respect, the Presbyterian translations really sanitize a lot of the biblical images. But the Bible is just like, it's just throwing out everything, you know, like every possible image. God is like the divine breasts. God is like a rose of Sharon. You know, God is like a papa. Like Papa. I thought God was Lord and King. No, Papa. God is like Papa. You know, it's just is always flinging out these wild images, which, and we tend not to pay as much attention to the variety of images. We kind of lock down onto a family of images. But yeah, you're right. I am deliberate about the language to God. Meister Eckhart says at one point, God, deliver me from God.
Yeah.
Deliver me from all of my images. And when you bump into unfamiliar images or terminology, then your little, and I don't mean this in a condemning way, your little idol of God, you know, your little image gets challenged, and it can break open a little bit. Oh, that image, which maybe was really nurturing to me or was really maybe very harmful to me, but that image actually isn't God. And so then your heart is open and can explore more about what this divine might be all about.
Can you say, where does Jesus fit in this vocabulary?
I'm trying to think how to answer that. You know, I'm going to give you what is perhaps a Simone Weil says the language of the bedchamber is not the language of the marketplace, and which maybe doesn't sound like it's directly answering your question yet or responding to your question. But what I mean is, there's a lot of images about who Jesus is, and a lot of them are quite toxic, and a lot of them are not and are beautiful. But for me, there's something so tender and intimate that I it's like talking about the bedchamber in the marketplace. It's too intimate. And just to use that word again, you know, that to just use this word as if Jesus, as if we all know what that is, connects it to a whole family of meaning, which I may not share.
Wendy, if I may.
Sure.
That's exactly why I loved your book. It really spoke in a non kind of dogmatic way and opened up so many possibilities of thinking and seeing and believing. And I loved your preface. I have notes all over the book. And I just was rereading it last night and stopped at page 7 because that was really interesting to me, where you say a contemplative way of life is motivated by a devotion to the welfare of others.
Mhm.
And to me, that was just such a beautiful way of expressing that you are in the world. You're not, I mostly come from, I was raised a Christian, but from a Buddhist standpoint, meditation, going inward, inward, inward. And how can you be contemplative, also going outward? Can you speak to that, please?
I think people have different dispositions, and everyone balances the different parts of themselves in different ways. That's the first thing to say. So what every one of you, if every one of you responded to that question, you would respond differently. Um, I think there's so many different ways to think about it. So I'll just pop in at one point. There can be before I say what I'm going to say, I'll say this. Everything that we do that makes us feel better, that soothes us, is to the good. You know, we live in a very stressful environment. What we do to make ourselves feel better is good. I think that's good. I'm not knocking it. To the contrary, go have your massage, you know, go paint your toenails, do whatever it takes to make yourself feel better. But I think and I think that's a good part of ourselves, an important part of ourselves, that we tend and care for our spirit, our mind, our psyche, our body. We are right to tend to ourselves and the different parts of ourselves. But that tending to ourselves is not really the deeper part of who or what we are. And it's certainly not the deeper part of our access to happiness or delight or joy or relationship to the beloved. The deeper part of ourselves is it's like we just open like a flower to the world and leave ourselves behind. You know, when Lorna goes to the concert, or any of you do anything, something can happen to you where you forget yourself. You know, you see your grandchild for the first time or for the millionth time, or you're listening to a piece of music, or you're walking and you hear a bird song. I was listening to a wren sing its springtime song this morning. And you pop out of yourself for a moment. You're not preoccupied with your anxieties, your desires, your needs. What am I going to do next? You've popped out. You are completely present to whatever it is you're present to. It might happen when you're sitting by someone's bed who's sick or dying, where you're totally present to them and you're not thinking, I'm scared, or I'm bored, or I'm sad, or you're just present to that moment. Do you know what I'm talking about? These moments where
Yes.
Yeah.
I do. And from that, you show up in the world and you make the world around you a better place, and the people that you're in contact with a better place. Because
This word ecstasy means two different things.
Mhm.
It means like great happiness. I mean, like crazy great happiness. And it also means, literally, it means standing outside of yourself.
Mhm.
Your stasis. And this is really important. Our deep happiness isn't when we're absorbed with ourselves, seeking pleasure or avoiding pain, or not that those are fine, but our deep happiness, our ecstasy, our delight is when we are outside of ourselves. Sitting by someone's deathbed can be a really sad thing, but when you're present to it, it's not happy like when you get married, but there's a kind of sweetness to it, which is beyond pleasure and pain. That there's a sweetness to being with somebody, even if they're in a difficult situation. And I think of contemplation from the one perspective as being what cultivates that capacity. We all have that capacity. You all know what that's like. And this is a cultivation of that capacity so that it arises more easily, you might say. So to return to Lorna's example, to walk by someone who you think is scary or smells bad, or you have a lot of negative assumptions about, doesn't feel good. But to walk by and go, oh, look at these people here, these beautiful flowers in the flower garden who need a little tending. That can be a real heart-opening sweetness. Whether you do anything about it or not, you may not be in a position to, meet needs, but your heart's open, you're present. Even just to look at someone with kind of loving eyes is an incredible gift to them, whether you solve their material circumstances or not. So in that sense, contemplation it's freedom from the tyranny of egocentrism, and it's for the world. And these two things are the same thing. Tell me about your own experience. What do you think?
Are you speaking to me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll tell you. I'm a painter. I watercolor, and my best moments are out when I'm in the field. Last week I was down at Point Lobos, and the week before in Big Sur, when I'm standing out in the under the beautiful sky, looking out into a beautiful place, and I'm one with the painting, which is I am just focused on an interior space in myself, looking at something, trying to get not maybe the exact likeness, but get a feeling of the place of where I am. And that puts me, I guess, in the contemplative space. I don't really have a meditation or a prayer practice, and but as I'm getting older, I think I should, and would like to maybe try that too. But I would say the painting, the being in that place of not knowing, but letting things come as they may, is the place that I feel, I guess, the most connected to a higher power or spirit world.
Well, it sounds to me like you do have a spiritual practice, and it's an incredibly powerful one. One of the wonderful thing about artists, they have to have this capacity to stand outside themselves, and they create something that most of us can't replicate. They create enormous beauty by this capacity to be present. So I think of that as a very, I would hate for you to take up centering prayer and give up your painting. Maybe you want to do both, but
Wendy, that consoles me because I went on this weekend to be with all these relatives. I never did any moment of silence. I was just dying to tear out the door and be with people, but I didn't think about me. So that's great.
yeah,
I didn't say a word about me either.
yeah. That can be a very sweet experience.
It was
Yeah.
very. But I wondered if I had deserted my practice.
I have this theory that you can't desert your practice. That there's my partner likes country music, which was kind of a shock to me when I first realized this, because that my family background is different. But there's this country music song. It may be called The Broken Road. And it's about somebody who is, it's a love song, and it's about someone who's come to their love after all kinds of other romantic and life misadventures. And it's quite a beautiful song, actually. And it's, you know, like, every mistake I made was the morning star leading to you.
Hmm.
So, well, when this person is kind of wandering through their life, you know, making all these mistakes and dead ends, he sees that everything about his life led him to his beloved.
Hmm.
And I just think that is such a beautiful picture of the spiritual path. Nothing is going to take you off that path. There might be things that cause you to suffer, and you think, oh, I wish I hadn't done that, or I caused suffering to myself or others because of I did this or I didn't do this. And maybe that's true, but nothing will take you off the path. Nothing can do that.
Nothing can separate us from the love of God.
That's exactly right. That's just not good. That's not a real thing. That's
We
it's
didn't learn that as kids.
no, and there's a way you have to maybe not tell your 5-year-old that. You have to hold that out till later. But or maybe, I don't know, who knows? But every single being is held in the divine.
Mhm.
From all eternity. You know, we learn God is eternal. God is infinite and eternal. There's no beginning or end. And that means there's no beginning. There's no beginning or end to the divine love. That it doesn't like come and go. And we have been held in that love since before we existed in anything we know anything about. And we will, there's nothing that can change that. There's absolutely nothing you or anyone else can do, even the most hated person you can imagine, anything any of us can do that will remove us from that love. We can cause ourselves suffering. We can cause others suffering, and that suffering is real. And I don't think it's God's will. I don't have that view. But nobody is not held and on a path to open up to where they understand they are beloved, and everybody else and everything else is beloved. And that's what beatitude is. Not when something happens differently, but when we wake up and know that. The this Greek word in the New Testament that is always in Jesus's mouth, metanoia. He comes out, metanoia, and good Protestants translate that repent.
Yeah.
And so we all know what that means. Oh, I'm a bad person and I have to say I'm sorry. Metanoia doesn't mean that. It didn't mean that until like the 16th century. It means something more like wake up. Wake up. He says, wake up. The kingdom of God is right here, right now, inside you, outside of you. As soon as you wake up, you will know this.
Yeah.
Over and over, the Gospels say this is what Jesus's message is. He roams around, wake up, metanoia. Metanoia, the kingdom of God is here. Just wake up. Sorry.
But you can't do it with your willpower.
No, but you can't will it, like shooting pool. You know, like I'm going to get to be a really good pool player, and I'm going to practice until I can really get the shot where I want it. What we can do is dispose ourselves to cultivate qualities that will make us more available to that. We can do that. We can allow ourselves to desire. We can allow ourselves to say crazy ass things like, why did I want to be in spiritual direction? Because I'm in love with God. Whoa, where did that come from? That is a desire. And you gave it words. And you're like, oh, that's weird. But you have the power to embrace that, to say, yeah, actually, that is true. I am in love. Or, yeah, it is true. I feel really lost. That's true. You can dispose yourself so that those things that lead you into the graciousness. Bye, Janet. Of this are more accessible to you.
Hmm.
May I ask what your contemplation practice is?
You may. It changes over the years. I will tell you one thing about myself. When I was 40, I experienced things that caused me to, for a number of years, have pretty severe stress disorder. And I lost the ability to read for 6 years, which is inconvenient if you're a university professor.
Oh my God.
And so I couldn't read, and I had been doing meditation. I'd done 2 9-month trainings in centering prayer. I had learned different forms I spent a lot of time studying with the Tibetan Buddhist monks, learning different forms of meditation with them. And I found I couldn't do any of that. I couldn't, so the kind of meditation in these different traditions I couldn't do. And I actually can't do them very well now. I can do them now after many, many years. I can do them for a few minutes. But it's not, so I couldn't really be a good member of your centering prayer group. My mind just can't do that anymore. But when that happened to me, I had begun to go to a place where I go a few times a year, Greenbow House of Prayer, outside Atlanta. And my Amma, as I call her, my teacher, after the first time I met her, I said, give me a word. That's what the desert ascetics would say to the Ammas and Abbas, give me a word. And she paused and she said, in everything, in every person, the fullness of the Godhead is being offered to you. Practice. So that was my word I took into this desert where I couldn't read, I couldn't pray the way I knew to pray. I had this word though. In everything, in every person, the fullness of the Godhead is being offered to you. So that's my main practice. To think of every single solitary thing I encounter as the fullness of the Godhead being offered to me. Terrible things and beautiful things, terrible things, not because God is willing some terrible, horrible thing in my life, but because the fullness of the Godhead is there with me in that experience. So that's my, you might say, underlying practice that I do all the time. But I found that doing a lot of body practice was important because my mind was shredded. Do a lot of yoga. I do a lot of chanting. I chant for about an hour every day. Visualization. I do meditative prayer, but I only do it. It might be 30 seconds, it might be 5 minutes, it might be longer, but I don't set a timer or think I have to do it. It just comes, and it might come and it might not, and that's fine. I just make myself present, and if I never force anything. So if it's, and I'm not advising that because I know, as Kay said, you sit and you don't notice anything happening, and yet enough something is happening. But because of the way my mind works, to kind of force myself into that practice is not constructive for me. So I do a variety of things, but that gives you some idea.
That's so interesting and outside of the parameter where I thought, okay, you go sit and, you kind of a combination of prayer and contemplation and meditation, you give yourself that, whatever it is, an hour a day, you take it into doing what you do throughout the day.
Mhm. Yeah. What are some of the practices you all do? Some of you do centering prayer, one of you paints. Maybe you don't think about one of the things I have my students do is I ask them to take up a practice at the beginning of the term, but it's not supposed to be like a religious practice. It's something they either do anyway or will start doing and think of, and it can be like a few seconds or a few minutes. And over the years, it's been fascinating what people do. They reframe what they do as a spiritual practice, or they start doing something like every night I'm going to go out and look at the sky, or so I try and encourage them to think spiritual practice can be anything.
Yeah. I can I
Yeah,
speak?
sure, Carolyn.
I came to contemplation through the practice of yoga.
Hmm.
I did the yoga first, and I came to yoga because I had a tragedy in my life,
Hmm.
which was the loss of a child who died when she was 29. And I found after that, I think I was having post-traumatic stress disorder or something, because every time I had a quiet moment, like waiting in traffic or something like that, I would mentally run through all the details of her death.
Hmm.
It was just always there. And the minute my mind was quiet, it came up. So I thought, I've got to do something. And I don't know why, but it came into my head. I would go to a yoga class, which I did, and I knew immediately that it could calm my mind.
Hmm.
I found out a couple years later when I started to do yoga teacher training, and we had to study the Yoga Sutra. And the second sutra is the purpose of yoga is to calm the fluctuations of the mind.
Hmm.
That's the whole purpose of this body practice. And it was through that then I gradually started to find out and learn about centering prayer.
Hmm.
And I did silent retreats, blah, 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 stuff like that. But I find that when your mind is calm and in the present,
Hmm.
everything is better.
Hmm.
So I was glad to hear you mention yoga.
Yeah. Well, I started doing yoga very seriously during this period of my life too.
Yeah,
Um,
it
yeah,
really, yeah. So,
it's when we talk to each other about what we actually do, we get a really rich sense of painting, yoga, centering prayer. And
right.
so if you wanted to pipe up, we'd hear some other things too. One of the things I do with my students is I start my classes with music, and let music be a kind of bridge of contemplative practice. Because, I teach in a seminary, and most of my students, well, some of my students have some kind of idea about contemplative or practice, and many of them don't. And so saying we're going to sit in silence for a period of time doesn't help them. They immediately, I can't do this, my mind, but but I have them, I prepare their bodies, I give them some guidance about their focusing on their body, and then we play a piece of music. And so they listen in a kind of meditative state, even if they're not meditators per se. And my classes are always very, very different after we've done that. We're all together, we're grounded, we're centered. And so one thing we could do going forward, if you were interested in continuing, is we could start that way. We could begin with a short little practice for meditators and non-meditators that might kind of gather us together. I don't know if you have interest in that or not.
Well, we actually do that at our centering prayer group in this church.
Yeah.
We do 10 minutes of body practice before we sit.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah,
So.
that's very wise. Yeah, good.
I think it would be wonderful to do that in this group. I can't find out the way that you put your thumb up on the machine.
That's one way.
Yeah, right. Oh, I see. There's one up over there on Cynthia's screen.
There's a little option at the bottom called reactions, and it has a little smiley face. And if you put your mouse on it,
a
few things pop up.
You can do all kinds of things.
There you go.
You can heart people. You can. Oh, I'm hearting myself. Oh.
I would like that because it would bring us together, as you say, one mind. And I'd also like to hear what kind of music you choose to focus us.
I use a huge variety of music. I use music from different traditions, different moods. It's I like the variety. I think I like to surprise people about what's possible. My partner read one of my books and said, you really color outside the lines.
Wendy, I really appreciated your book and some of the things you write about in terms of the church and what people maybe are looking for or thought what feeds people, and whether people went to church or never did. And we have lots of conversations about that here. If people, I know one person said recently, I don't know what to say to my friends who've never been to church. What happens here? So both at our 8:30 contemplative service, but also at 10, these different entry points of silence, a great variety of music, jazz, Taizé, hymns, and whether it's listening or singing, different instruments. So I agree and wholeheartedly with you that I sense, certainly here and in other churches, this broadening and deepening of ways to experience the presence of the beloved divine love together, and that it is an opportunity to say, and now as you go about your daily life, what are you noticing? What happened on Sunday morning or Wednesday morning? So I'm grateful that you're teaching at the seminary, and that we use poetry in worship and so on. And this it is not a text, and it is not only we have to read a psalm and we have to read there's this richness of where the Spirit speaks to us. I was talking to someone saying, well, so it's all up for grabs. You as a Christian pastor, you can use anything. Well, an awful lot, and being outside the lines. So I'm hopeful about that. I'm sure some people come and say, wow, I can't get my bearings here. but I hear more the appreciation for
Yeah.
both the collective experiences, but yeah, what does that invite people to do? I tend to do, as one of my practices, journaling, but
Yeah.
trying to do different things with that. And I don't do it every day, but yeah, back to the question about images of the divine.
Mhm.
Both in my own personal spiritual life as well as a retreat leader and so on, that what you described, I remember reading Sally McFague's book
Mhm.
about models of God.
Mhm.
So mother, lover, and friend.
Mhm. Yeah.
Does that open in us when we let go of those other words, those other images, and how radical and disorienting, helpful that is. So I hope you'll continue to say more about that. What are some of the, as you said, many biblical images, but as we paint them or sing them or
Right.
write them down, how that opens us. So
Well, I enjoyed being at your worship service, and I have noticed that um, the church is kind of between a rock and a hard place, where it's been doing something and people don't want it to change, and people who can't enter there are having trouble finding a place. And you're kind of finding this in between, this liminal space where you're providing a worship service, and it's the way it is, but you're also really being very creative about how the Spirit can speak to us. And that's a beautiful thing.
thank you.
And I was thinking as you were speaking that worship is a little like centering prayer. It seems like maybe something is happening, maybe nothing very dramatic is happening, but when you subject yourself to it over a period of time, there's a formation that happens there.
Mhm.
Um,
Exactly.
be quite powerful.
Yeah.
Well, friends, you can guide me. We can start with music as a kind of centering practice, but you can guide me in terms of what you want this time together to be. And I'm happy to accommodate, as my teacher used to say, within the bounds of taste and reason, accommodate what you would like this time to be.
Should we put it in the chat or say it out loud?
Well, you can put it in the chat, you can say it out loud, or you can think about it, and you can let me know. If you want to just shout it out, that's fine.
I love poetry.
Poetry, all right. I do too.
Poetry, psalms. Yes.
Okay, great.
Well, in the spirit of, sorry, go.
I appreciate each week that we are touching on the chapter of the week in
Yeah.
some way, so that we don't need to study it, but that next week, chapter 2 is some touch points.
So I could say a few things about the chapter, and if people want to think about that, that's fine. And if we want to off-road, that's fine too.
Great.
That reminds me, we do have one book left at the church. If you didn't get one and you'd like one.
Yeah, you better buy it. Those 27 cents I get, they really make a difference.
Really?
Hippie needs new shoes.
Oh, my.
All right. Well, if you think of other things, we can touch on the chapter. We can have some. You can bring things yourselves. You might find a poem this really spoke to me this week. I'd like to share it. That would be fine.
Find something in the chapter that really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we didn't speak about the dragons this week, but maybe next week we can talk a little bit about the dragons.
Mhm.
Okay, I will. I have a memory that's like a sieve, but I'm happy to talk about the dragons. I think they're important because sometimes we get this image of contemplation like it's all happiness and peace, but actually it can be that, and over the long haul, of course, but it also unearths the dragons.
Great.
Well, thank you, Wendy. And
Thank
we'll look
you.
forward
Thank you
to
all.
Another,
Oh, I did want to say one thing. For the rest of the weeks, I teach from 11 to 12:30. So on Tuesday. So I'm going to come here directly from my class. So I may show up more like 25 till.
okay, good to know.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hope you catch your breath.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording.